All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Maureen Conway. I'm Vice President at the Aspen Institute and the Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program. And I'm just thrilled to welcome you to today's event, The Case for Good Jobs, How Great Companies Bring Dignity, Pay, and Meaning to Everybody's Work, a book talk with my friend Zainab Tan. This conversation is part of the Economic Opportunities Program ongoing Opportunity in America discussion series in which we explore the changing landscape of economic opportunity in the U.S., the implications for individuals, families, and communities across the country, and ideas for change. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, both in person and virtually. If this is your first time joining one of our events, you can find recordings of previous events in the series on our website at as.pn/EOP events. And if you look at those events and you go all the way back to 2014, you'll find one in which I'm talking to Zainab about her first book, The Good Jobs Strategies, How the Smartest Companies Invest in Employees to Lower Costs and Boost Profits. So I'm so honored and delighted to welcome Zainab back to talk about her new book. And for those of you who don't know Zainab, Dr. Tan, I'll call her Dr. Tan once, is a professor of the practice in Operations Management Group at MIT Sloan School of Management. She's also the co-founder and president of the nonprofit Good Jobs Institute, where she works with companies to improve their operations in a way that satisfies employees, customers, and investors alike. Before joining MIT Sloan, Zainab spent several years on the faculty at Harvard Business School. She's received teaching awards at both institutions for excellence in teaching. And that's not really surprising because Zainab, and you'll hear, she has a real keen eye for practical details and a real understanding of the pressures of modern business. But she really brings that together with this just foundational commitment to purpose and to human dignity and principles. And so she really inspires her students to believe that they too can build careers of meaning as they build careers in business. And I know that because I've met many of her students, and they're great. There's Sarah. Sarah, who is also the head of the Good Jobs Institute and was one of Zainab's students, is a shining example of Zainab's amazing students. But I also know how inspirational it is because Zainab, you inspire me. So really, thank you so much for being here today. And it's great to have folks in the room. I love having folks in the room again. But I know we have many more folks joining us online. So if you'll bear with me for a moment while I just give a little technical details. So all of the online attendees are muted, but we welcome questions. Please use the Q&A box on your screen. And thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can today. We also encourage folks to share their views. We know many folks in our audience are experts. So if you have ideas, resources, examples that you want to share, please use the chat function. We always appreciate your feedback. Please take a moment to respond to our quick feedback survey, which should pop up as you leave the session. You can also email feedback to us. That goes to for you guys in the room too. You can always send us your thoughts or music choices at eop.program@aspeninstitute.org. We also encourage you to tweet about the conversation. Our hashtag is TalkOpportunity. If you have technical issues during the webinar, please, you can put a note in the chat, or again, the email is eop.program@aspeninstitute.org. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared via email, posted on our website. And closed captions are available for this discussion. Please use the CC button at the bottom of the screen. Okay. I also want to say that I'm super thrilled that this is a pre-launch for this event. Your actual publication date is June 6th. Is that right? So we get to be first. Yay. But we do actually, even though it's not published until June 6th, we do have some copies here for sale. So if you're in the room, you can pick up a copy. We'll do a little signing afterwards. And apparently, my colleagues tell me we're also going to have a raffle. So a couple of you lucky folks may get a free copy. So stick around at the end of our session today. Okay. So I'm done.
Great.
Now
Great incentives for people to hang out afterward.
Now over to you. So, a lot has happened in nine-ish years since you wrote the original book, looking at the operational strategies, and you've expanded your lens to include a lot of different kinds of industries, and you've started a nonprofit, and you've worked with a bunch of different organizations, taught hundreds of students. And yet, you still need to write a book to make the case for good jobs. So maybe, just to start us off, why did you want to write this particular book, and why now?
Thank you. First of all, Maureen, thank you so much for inviting me. I am so excited that Aspen Institute is the first place where I get to launch my book. In 2014, we did this together, and it was so much fun, and we get to do it again. And thank you all for being here. So in 2014, when I wrote the Good Job Strategy, I described two different approaches to profitability. And I was focusing on low-cost businesses, so companies that are providing the lowest prices to their customers. And there were two different approaches to profitably compete on low cost. One approach was to see workers as a cost to be minimized, pay as little as possible, invest in them as little as possible, and then consequently operate with high turnover and all the problems that come with high turnover. Right? So operational problems, customer service problems, that ended up reducing sales and profits for companies. But there are a bunch of companies that's the dominant approach. They operate that way. They've been profitable for years, but they live in this vicious cycle of high turnover and poor performance. So that was the dominant approach. But then I saw another approach that fewer companies took, and that was to see their employees as human beings, real human beings who can drive profits, who can drive customer satisfaction, who can drive growth, and investing heavily in their employees, paying them a lot more than market wages, investing in more predictable, sustainable schedules and health benefits, etc. And these companies operated with low turnover, and they operated in a virtuous cycle of low turnover and good performance. But what I found in that original research was that it wasn't just investment in people that enabled them to achieve those outcomes. It was also specific operational choices. So that was the first book, and it was the what of the good job strategy. What are the principles? What are some of the operational practices that you need to use? After the book was published, I started getting requests from leaders of companies, from the largest employer in the United States to dog walking businesses, smaller companies. And many leaders came and said, we are in that vicious cycle. And we feel trapped in that vicious cycle. And they wanted to get out of that trap, and they didn't know how. And at the time, I didn't know how to help them either. Luckily, Sarah Kalloch was my student. And with Sarah and Roger Martin, we started this nonprofit Good Jobs Institute. And during the last 6-7 years, we learned how to make the case inside your organization, outside your organization, and how to adapt the good job strategy, because it's a system, and making system change is not easy. So I wrote this book to be able to share what we have learned and get those leaders who feel stuck to be unstuck, or trapped to be untrapped.
Great, that's fantastic. Let's hope many of them are getting unstuck. And so for folks who haven't read the first book, can you just do a quick recap of sort of what are some of the key operational choices that you see are integral to the good job strategy?
Yeah, and I'll mention the companies that I studied for the first book, so you'll get a sense by being customers. These were low-cost businesses. Costco, how many of you know Costco? You've been there. Trader Joe's, Quick Trip. Anyone who has been to Quick Trip? What is it like?
It's wonderful. I mean, it's owned by. I mean, maybe I have the wrong answer, but it's owned by worker-owned.
What is it wonderful though as a customer? Like what? Why is it wonderful?
Oh, see, I have a limited amount of experience with this because my wife is from Milwaukee and she's a huge Quick Trip fan, and so I've become indoctrinated because of her.
Okay.
But the fact that any place that I believe is at least employee-owned is moving in the right direction versus it being owned by.
Great.
That's my main thing there. I mean, I wouldn't eat a lot of the things there myself.
Awesome.
Yeah, but that's what I think.
Any customers of Quick Trip, like actual customers of Quick Trip here? Mark, what is it from the customer experience? It's great that they're owned partly by their employees.
It's stock, stuff is in the right place. The person at the counter is, if not overjoyed to see you, pleasant to do business with. I mean, it's the kind of place where you're willing to go back because you have positive customer experience.
Yeah, I asked this from the customer's perspective because I get the same answer no matter where I go. It's clean, it's stocked, people are friendly, you get in and out, and this company prints money. I mean, they are quite profitable. Costco, similar, they win with their customers, they make a lot of money, and they offer good jobs. If you look at Quick Trip's employee turnover, it's not 10%, 15% better than industry average. It's a quarter of industry average. Costco is similar. Trader Joe's is similar. So I looked at these companies, what is their secret? Like, what do they do to be able to create these great outcomes for customers, employees, and investors? And I found that they all, in addition to investing in their people, had this operational design with 4 specific choices. And these choices made their employee investment worthwhile because they increased the productivity and contribution of their workers. Let me give you an example. If you go to a typical supermarket, you might see, go in front of the jam aisle, you might see 150 different types of jams. And their prices are probably changing all the time. There are little coupons that employees put in, right? So what do the employees of those stores do? They take so much time shelving those merchandise. They take so much time changing the price stickers all the time. If you go to Trader Joe's, maybe you'll see 10 types of jams. And the prices will be stable. What that means is that now the Trader Joe's employee can shelve those much faster. Now that employee can know about the jam, so they can tell the customer about it. Now that employee is able to do their tasks more efficiently, and as a result of that, Trader Joe's can pay them more. So the operational choices like this, simplification, empowering your workers, cross-training them, those are the types of choices that I saw among the companies that were able to create these outcomes.
Yeah, great. So I think that but I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about it's always amazing to see how interesting she makes operations. I just have to say.
I tell my students, operations is where spreadsheets meet humans and natural resources. Like I used to teach inventory management. Your inventory management decisions determine how we use natural resources. We make decisions, we teach our students how to do scheduling, how to do staffing. Those decisions change the lives of people. So these are not numbers, they are human beings or natural resources that, of course, operations is exciting. Of course it is exciting. But may I say one thing? So in 2014 when I came here, and I was so excited about all these operational decisions, and somebody in the audience in this book talk asked me, what role does leadership play in the good job strategy? And then I said, it's all about operations. It's all about operational choices. And I apologize. I would like to give a different answer now. Because since that time, I've interacted with lots of business leaders, some of the founders of these companies. And what I learned was that they have a very different value system, and they have a very different mental model. In their minds, it's not acceptable to operate with high turnover. In their minds, it's not acceptable that their employees are not making enough to put food on the table. So their mental models, and they focus so much on their customers to be able to create value for their customers, and they realize if we don't have an empowered, motivated, capable workforce, we can't deliver to our customers. So leadership plays a huge role, and I take that answer back from 9 years ago.
We'll go edit that. Great. So you talked in the beginning about sort of these business leaders that are stuck, though, like in this bad system, right? And trying to get them unstuck. But But in your book, you sort of describe a little bit of what they're stuck with, right? You describe these sort of 5 corporate disabilities. Can you sort of say what is the disability? What are the dysfunctions that they're kind of stuck with?
So in my initial research, when I looked at the vicious cycle that companies were operating in, the costs that I considered, and my colleagues, this was a group effort, were lost sales, lost productivity, higher product costs, etc. All the costs associated with poor operational execution. But then once we started working with companies and spending so much time inside them, we realized, and Sarah and I learned this together, that when you operate with high employee turnover, there are so many things as a business that you cannot do. There are so many good practices that you can't implement, you can't adopt in your organization. And I call these corporate disabilities. So I'll give you an example. The first corporate disability that I talk about is you can't hire the right people and you can't train them well. So a background, if you operate with high turnover, there are all sorts of operational problems. The managers who are managing these units are constantly fighting fires. They are in a retail store, they are checking out customers, they are shelving merchandise, they're trying to figure out, oh, who didn't show up today? I'm gonna find out who can come in. So they're constantly firefighting, and they have no time to hire the right person. And even if the company has great hiring practices on paper, they don't implement them. Sarah, when we started working together, one of the first things that Sarah did was to work as a frontline employee at a large company. And this was not an undercover operation. The CEO knew about it. Sarah spent 9-10 weeks working at this retailer. And she had just graduated from MIT Sloan. She applied with her real resume. The hiring person never asked, like, why does somebody who just graduated from MIT want to work shelving merchandise? And they never did reference check. You had a drug test, and you were hired. So I mean, she's very capable. I'm not. She's very capable. But that's the and once she got hired on the training, she had 41 hours of training. 23 of those 41 hours were wasted because there were 6 hires, but only 4 computers. So there wasn't enough computers on the computer training for all the new hires. There were constantly glitches. The managers were not there to answer questions. She shadowed somebody in the checkout. The problem was Sarah was not going to work at the cash register. And the person only spoke Spanish, and Sarah doesn't speak Spanish. So again, you can have great training on paper, but on the job training, but those don't get implemented if you have that type of instability. So what happens when you don't hire the right person, you don't train them well? Your employees are by design not very capable, right? They don't know. Like, it's not because of it's not because themselves are not capable, but they just don't know. So from the leader's perspective, now I'll get to the second corporate disability. If you see your workforce and you realize that they don't know much, do you want to empower them? Do you want them to make decisions for your customers or do you want them to use their judgment? Of course not, right? So then corporate leaders start taking away more control, right? More decisions from the units and put more controls. And then, of course, some of their decisions are bad decisions, like selling B chairs in New England in September, right? Like, the weather is not that great in New England in September. So those decisions are not good decisions. Then the frontline employees lose trust in corporate. They say, those corporate people, they ask us to do things, they have no idea. And then they decide they're not going to follow the rules because the rules don't make sense. And then when they don't follow the rules, the corporate people say, oh, those people, we can't trust them even to perform simple tasks. So then there's that distrust loop that continues. So this is another corporate disability. I can go on, but these are the type of things. We know empowerment is great for companies. We know hiring the right people and training them well is good for companies. But when you operate with high turnover, you just can't implement these good practices.
Yeah. Well, I just love how you sort of always frame this in sort of the human experience of this. And actually, just a little aside, my daughter was in a retail job over last summer. And, again, she wasn't trained properly. And I remember you talking about this before, like, people don't want to be standing in front of a customer not being able to serve them, right? Like, she wasn't trained in how to take cash. And it's really embarrassing to say, like, I don't know how to let you pay for what you want to pay for. So Yeah. So she doesn't go back there, and so to the turnover thing and anyway.
And the worst thing about this is more what you said. She doesn't want to fail in front of the customer.
Yeah.
Most people, almost all people, go to work to be able to do a good job, right? But we have designed a system where, first of all, millions of workers are in a vicious cycle of poverty. Their pay is so low that they can't make ends meet. They can't meet their budgets. And as a result of that, they have all sorts of physical, mental, cognitive difficulties. And that means they can't perform well on the job, right? They make more mistakes. They can't focus on the job. They have more attendance problems. If you have, a little emergency, you can't take care of that emergency when you're poor. So all of those things affect your performance on the job, and you don't get promoted. So you end up in this vicious cycle of poverty. So what happens from the executive's point of view is they see workers and they say, you know what, that person, they can't do anything right. They can't even show up on time. They can't even do the most basic thing right. And then they lose faith in the people. And not recognizing, so they lose faith in the human being. And that, I think, is a huge driver of why we have these jobs. Mercadona, one of the companies that I studied, they have a bunch of principles. The number one principle is everyone is reliable. So they design everything assuming that everyone is reliable. And then they make sure that everyone is reliable. So
yeah, no, that's great. What I love also about how you describe these things is that you think in systems, right? And you keep saying and you say this several times in the book, it's a system. It's a good job system. It's not just wages. It's not just schedules. It's not just cross training, right? Like thinking in terms of investing and building systems for success. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about that and also talk about sort of some of the do's and don'ts, and I certainly see of raising wages, right? And I see similar parallels in the social sector as well in terms of needs for system thinking, both in terms of employment practices in the social sector, but also how the social sector thinks about creating change. So anyway, that's sort of a complicated question, but really, if you could just lean in a little more on sort of like the systems aspect of this, and sort of particularly, there's a lot of conversation around wages. So particularly thinking about the do's and don'ts of wages and how that can't be just the singular focus.
Yeah, so first of all, pay is extremely important to make the job a good job. If you can't get paid enough to have agency in your life, nothing else really matters, right? So pay is extremely important, but it's one component of the system. So when it comes to pay, when we work with companies that are stuck in this vicious cycle, we encourage them to raise pay as much as possible, as early as possible in their journey. And then because that's how you get out of the vicious cycle. That's how employees get out of their vicious cycle of poverty. And that's how, as an organization, you get out of the vicious cycle of mediocrity. And so pay is extremely important, but then pay alone is not going to drive great outcomes. For workers, they will, but not for companies immediately. It doesn't even drive turnover immediately. It takes some time. So what are some of the things on the workspace, on the 4 operational choices of the good job strategy that you can use to reduce the workload, to make pay work for you? And we encourage companies to find ways to reduce workload in a way that benefits their customers. So raise pay as early as possible, but don't think about pay in isolation. Make other changes so that the pay pays off. And some of the do's and don'ts of pay raises, I haven't yet seen a context where the pay increase was perfect. Like, no one complained. It was so easy to do it. I mean, we are humans. We care about fairness, right? We all care about fairness. And compression is a real issue. So I can guarantee that when you raise pay, you will make mistakes. But the big recommendation is always explain the why and involve the people in making decisions. So those are some of the things related to pay. But things outside pay and the system perspective is really important. For example, we know that one of the other issues for workers, especially in service industries like retail, is scheduling. Workers tend to get their schedules 1 or 2 weeks in advance, and their schedules, their hours change all the time. So creating consistency, creating predictability, giving them enough hours is a very important thing for workers. But creating those schedules require the workload to be stable. And that is not possible if the deliveries into your store are coming in very unpredictable times and the times when there are so many customers in the store. So when we say systems, usually we'll do a workshop and we'll have everyone, Good Jobs Institute, we do 2-day workshops with companies. We will have people from logistics, from merchandising, from finance, from store operations all together, and we say, okay, let's focus on deliveries. What does the logistics function care about? Oftentimes, logistics cares about minimizing their transportation costs, right? They work in their silos, and they say, I want to minimize my transportation costs. So if the deliveries are unpredictable, if they vary all the time, so be it. The stores should just deal with it. But a system view will say, look, if we just focus on the transportation costs, our customers are not going to get the right merchandise because we might not have the right people to shelve them. Right? Think in terms of customers. Our workers will have unstable schedules. It means that the turnover is going to be so much higher so that we won't be able to serve our customers. And this will have an effect on our business. So the system view is thinking about how does this affect the customer? How does this affect the worker and the work that they do? And how does it affect the financial performance? And considering all three of those.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things you just started to point to is sort of and you talk about this in the book, sort of this over-reliance on metrics, right? Like the transportation people are just like focused on their metric, right? And so I'm wondering, what you think about sort of this over-reliance on metrics, and if you could talk about that a little bit more. But what do the metrics kind of miss, and are there better metrics that people should be using and thinking about?
Yeah, what is that? Not everything that counts is counted, and not everything that's counted counts. Right? And we teach our students to make decisions relying on numbers, increasingly at all the business schools, mine included, and that could lead to some wrong decisions. And of course, there are good metrics and bad metrics. For example, metrics related to employees, employee turnover, what percentage of your workforce is making a living, what percentage of your managers are hired, promoted from within. Those are great metrics on the employee side. On the customer side, there are metrics too. So you can use non-financial metrics. That will be better. But still, there's so much reliance on data and historical data in particular to make decisions that can be very dangerous. I'll give you one example. Sam's Club is one of the companies that adopted this Good Job system. And there's a terrific interview with the chief product officer of Sam's Club, Tim Simmons, in Harvard Business Review in this last edition. And Tim Simmons says, previously, when we looked at what we were able to do with efficiencies, with different changes, we were able to move efficiency maybe 1 or 2%. But during the last 4 years, we were able to increase efficiency by 20%. So all those decisions that you made to improve efficiency by 20%, you would not have made them if you looked at historical data, past data, because the past doesn't tell you what is possible. The past doesn't tell you what you can imagine. It just tells you what happened in the past.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples from the book was, speaking of Sam's Club, was talking about John Furner explaining, like, I could look at this spreadsheet and I can use this spreadsheet analysis to tell me my wages are just fine, or I can use it to tell me I need to double my wages, which was sounded kind of crazy to me. But I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about what did he do when he realized that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that they did was, okay, for us, we want to win with our customers. To be able to win with our customers, we need employee turnover to be low. For our employee turnover to be low, we need to pay our people better. So first they had that logical conclusion. And then they say, okay, how do we become the employer of choice? Right? Let's not benchmark ourselves to other mediocre companies. Let's benchmark ourselves to the best. and we want to be like the best. And that was what they concluded. And you can look at spreadsheets, make very different conclusions. For example, you could be operating a senior living organization, and we work with different senior living organizations. And this is where, our parents, grandparents are cared for, most vulnerable population perhaps. And you could look at spreadsheets, and you could decide, looking at spreadsheets, that, hey, last time we raised staffing levels, it didn't improve our profitability, right? So you could come to that conclusion looking at the numbers. But what you don't see is what happened to mistakes? What happened to that resident who wanted to go to the bathroom, but for 45 minutes she couldn't because there was no one who could take her to the bathroom, and now she soiled herself and her dignity is crushed. It doesn't tell you all the caregivers who are already working multiple jobs and they're not shining in front of their residents that they care so much about. So these are the things that data don't tell us, metrics don't tell us, and if we rely too much on it, we can start cutting ethical corners.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit, like you just need to get closer to the work. Yeah. So one of the pressures I think that also comes up a lot is, the role of investors. And, certainly CEOs and many other people are mindful of the views of Wall Street. So what is your view of sort of the we would, but Wall Street won't let us kind of argument? And have you seen that sort of, have you seen Wall Street and investors actually change over the past decade in terms of how they think about these things?
Yeah, I think after spending some time with leaders like Jim Sinegal, the co-founder of Costco, my view is investors don't run companies. They invest in companies, but company leaders run companies, right? They have agency. At the same time, though, investors can influence what matters to them. So think about a company that recently went through a merger or they invested in technology and what the investor reaction might have been to those types of decisions. And then think about instances where a company says, I'm going to raise pay for my frontline workers, and what the investor reaction is. That reaction is usually negative. Right? There's a small period where the stock price it's not long, but there's a small period where your stock price declines right after you say I'm going to raise pay, or I'm going to, during COVID, I'm going to invest in safety of my employees and customers, right? So for business leaders, then you look at this and you say, what is legitimate in the eyes of investors? Clearly, investing in people is not legitimate, but there are so many other things that are more legitimate, and some of those other things are much easier and faster to do. So then leaders tend to direct their energy and their effort into those things that are easier and faster. They have legitimacy, and these leaders, they're under a ton of pressure. They have competition. They're under constant pressure, so they take that easy route.
Yeah, I guess that's still that is still the issue. I appreciated your call to business leaders to really summon their courage. Again, like sort of back to the human qualities. But you also kind of note that they don't really need to be that courageous. There's a good case for good jobs, and there's both a positive financial return, but also this sort of positive ethical or moral return in some sense. Business leaders, not only are showing sort of proper stewardship for shareholders by investing in people, but they'll also be often acting in a way that sort of feels better for them and is aligned with their values. And it's interesting. I feel like, especially in our social sector, we try to be very hard-headed and say we're just going to talk about the ROI and just going to focus on that. But how do you think about sort of making that kind of ethical case in conversations with business leaders? How does that come up?
I think first it's nice for us to remind ourselves that CEOs, the executives running these companies, they're humans too. and they care about similar issues. So when we run workshops with companies, we oftentimes have the company present an analysis of what percentage of their full-time employees are making a living wage. And there are all the executives in the room. And when those data are presented, there's usually silence in the room. And there's somebody says, I had no idea. But I've never been in a room where executives, CEOs were proud of their employees not making a living wage. Right? They don't want that. They don't want that to happen. Now, in certain contexts where companies' profit margins are very high and their low-wage employees represent a smaller portion of their overall costs. Think about financial services, for example. If you are faced with that scenario of finding that so many of your employees are not making it, even though you're paying market or above market, raising pay so that everyone can have a living wage is not that difficult, right? You can completely use your ethical drive and change it. Now let's move to another scenario. Let's move to an organization, Mudbay. This is a retail chain, pet stores, pet products, products for dogs and cats, and their owners, not for product. But when they started their Good Jobs journey, their profit margins were 2%. Their labor cost as a percentage of sales was nearly 15%. Now, if they raise pay by 30%, they wipe out their profitability, right? So in that particular context, this is seen, at least, as a riskier decision. And you have your competition. You are making this decision under uncertainty. So of course, it's not that easy. And in those contexts, what we have found is companies that adopted this system was they made the competitive case. They cared about the ethics, but they said, you know what, we must do this because it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do. Right? In those contexts, the ethical case alone is, I think, harder to make.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But I'm glad you raised Mudbay, because we actually were out in Seattle in 2014, and it was not long after the city council had decided to start phasing in a minimum wage of $15 in Seattle. And Mudbay, being out there, was going to have to find a pathway to 15. They had several years to get there, but they were going to have to find their way. So, and I know you're not really a policy person, but how much can sort of like how do you think about what businesses can do on their own, and how do we think about sort of maybe societal choices as reflected through policy? Like, what do you think about sort of that balance? Or
so I teach at a business school. And that's my audience, right? And I have students like Sarah who then go out and who try to change the world. At the same time, I don't think that businesses alone can solve our big societal problems. While I believe that, I also believe that we can't solve some of our big societal problems without business leaders. And these leaders work in a context, in a system, and I wish that system was better. And within that system, though, they can make choices. And what we try to do is, within that system, how do you choose the Good Jobs approach? And when we went to Seattle, Maureen, the issue was $15 wage increase. Now we're talking about $17, right? So think about that pay raise, the minimum wage raise, and think about different reactions that could come from the business community. So if your inclination is you're in that vicious cycle and you have the mindset of labor is just a cost to be minimized, then if you're in that world and now the minimum wage is higher, some leaders might say, hey, I'm going to try to figure out what can I automate? How do I use fewer people? where else do I cut? Maybe I'll just have worse customer service. I'll use fewer people to get more work done, right? That could be one approach. I think that will be the wrong approach. The good approach will be more enlightened leaders will say, hey, I have to raise pay anyway. What if I raise pay and increase productivity and contribution of my people? Right, so that they can, as a human, use their talents, their abilities, their hearts, their heads, and their hands to help us thrive in front of our customers and be productive. That will be the right approach. And I'm hoping that as the demographic changes and we will see more leaders choosing that approach. Having said that, I'm all for policy that makes it easier for companies to choose good jobs and harder to choose bad jobs.
Yeah, great. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm coming to you guys. So get ready. I was struck in the book, in a couple of places that people were sort of saying, well, this good job strategy, it's obvious, and actually, you yourself in the epilogues say that in many ways what you're talking about is just basically principles of good management, right? So is the strategy kind of like a return to fundamentals, and is corporate America ready to sort of do that?
Yeah, the fundamentals. One of my favorite reactions to my first book was from the then CEO of Walmart USA, now the CEO of New Zealand Air, Greg Foran, and he said, "This is so blindingly obvious." And I would say no academic likes their work to be seen as blindingly obvious. But what do I say? Focus on the customer. Design the work so people are productive, so that they can serve the customer well. These are old school management practice. Hire the right people, train them. These are old school management principles, and they have been hijacked by focus on short-term financial decision making for decades. Right? In that epilogue, I describe GE under Jack Welch. And it was, the focus was so much on deal making, mergers. We fired the bottom 10%, and it was all on the numbers. And he almost made running the core business and doing well operationally uncool. I told you how cool operations are, and now so I hope now there will be more leaders going back to basics of let's create real value for our customers, and let's do it decently. I'm hopeful. I don't know if that's where corporate America is going, but that's why I do what I do. So
great, that's fantastic. I do have more questions, but I'd love to take questions from folks here too. So. Wonderful. So right here and then here. Yes, you.
I'm sorry.
He's going to bring you a mic. Sorry.
I'm sorry. It was a longer walk than I thought, so I missed a few minutes of your presentation.
No worries.
Really important issues. My cousin was one of the founders of at MIT of artificial intelligence, so I've come at this for a while now. Okay, so people are getting excited about AI and how it's applicable. Now, what does this mean in terms of enriching the core job for somebody? Customer service can be gratifying, but what about enhancing the actual content of the job beyond customer service? What ideas do you have there in terms of a future of someone who may enjoy retail, would like to move up, but doesn't want to be CEO, but sees a future? But what kind of future?
Yeah, I will... So there are multiple parts, multiple different ways that one can answer the question. One of the things that I will start with is, what does AI do to work, and what does AI do to jobs? And my answer there is, again, we have agency. AI doesn't determine what it's going to do to jobs or to work. It's up to us how we use it that will determine whether it's going to be used for empowering people or it's going to be used just for replacing people and that. So one part of it that we have agency. The other part of it is, and I will probably stick with the retail or frontline context, but AI and technologies could be presenting wonderful opportunities to augment people and re-enable people to use their whole human talents. When I was at Mercadona, one of the things that they told me was, we never want to ask a person to do what a machine can do. That type of attitude is a wonderful attitude. One company that has done a fantastic job during the last few years using AI and technologies to create better jobs for workers has been, again, Sam's Club. Sam's Club, and I'll give you one example. If you went to there to replace your tire for your car, it used to take maybe 25, 30 minutes for the frontline employee associate to look at different manuals and to figure out, what's your car and what is the right tire that fits your car. Now, using technology, that takes 4 or 5 minutes. Now that frontline employee can be an advocate for the customer, can really help solve customers' problems. And by the way, because the job is more productive, they can be paid a lot more. And they can be the next one to be promoted to become a manager, assistant manager, and then a manager. So I see these types of technological changes to be a great complement to humans and enable humans to do what they do best.
Great. Over here.
One of the things I've noticed over the last 40 or 50 years in terms of good jobs, there's many, many fewer of them. And one of the ways that's been accomplished by the employers is the elimination of post-retirement benefits. So essentially, instead of providing for a defined benefit pension plan, retiree health insurance plan, they'll give you maybe better wages and better benefits while you're working. But once you leave the job, it's gone. So I think that's really crucial in terms of what a good job is. Work someplace for 30 or 40 years and then wind up with nothing. It's I don't think it's a good job.
Yeah, I agree. And during the last 30, 40 years, we have also seen a decoupling of productivity growth from wage growth. And it's not just benefits that are taken out, but wage growth also hasn't kept up with the productivity growth that we have seen either.
Mark?
I know you teach in a business school where there are a number of people who either now or in the past have been big advocates for unions, which is not generally something that's advocated in a business school. So in your good jobs approach, what is the role of unions or collective bargaining in ensuring and protecting good jobs?
Yeah. So again, coming back to this decoupling of wage growth from productivity growth, it's not a coincidence that unionization has declined during that same period, right? So workers not having that much power has contributed to this. What is my opinion on unions? So I don't have one opinion. Again, I will come to the system, which is it depends on what that union's relationship is with the company and what that union does. So one example, Mark, was, if you go back a couple decades and you look at the auto industry, right, it was still heavily unionized. People had good pay, good benefits, but the job was not mind-numbing and degrading, right? You were just doing the same thing over and over again. So it's not that union was prevented a good job, but it's not whether we have a union or not, but it's how you use that relationship for prosperity, for workers and for companies, and value for their customers.
Yeah. Yes.
I'd like if you would just explain a little more. When you, in one of the examples you talked about, it was some company that said everyone is reliable. Help me to understand deeper what that means, the approach.
Yeah. So this is Mercadona, the Spanish supermarket chain, and they say everyone is reliable, which means that when there's a problem in the company, we don't blame the person. We blame the system. We say, what is in our system that's preventing us from creating great outcomes? Oftentimes in many businesses, there's a problem and a person is blamed, right? Oh, this is their fault. Here, everyone is reliable. Everybody comes to work wanting to do a good job. We can count on them. What is preventing them from doing a good job? And let's fix our system and not fix the people versus fixing the people.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting because I know, like, I've had conversations with a number of economists recently. And economists will like to say, like, invest in education, invest in people's skills so that they can be more productive. And I say, well, but isn't productivity really like a function of how the job is designed? And then they go, oh, well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, so, I think it's really, I think really thinking about that job design as a driver of productivity is really important.
Yeah. Let's think as much about upskilling jobs as we do about upskilling workers.
Okay, so you have a question from our audience, and then we'll go back around there.
So a couple of questions from our online audience. Number one, raising wages in industries substantially controlled by publicly defined reimbursements like childcare or long-term care can be very challenging. What are your thoughts about good jobs in those settings? And then one more question. We recently started profit sharing at our company. What are your thoughts on businesses doing this and how it can contribute to good jobs?
So the first one is about raising pay is difficult in childcare and those types of settings.
In jobs that are reimbursed by the government.
Yeah, I mean, let's think about this. Our priorities and our values as a society. Those of you who have children who go to daycare. And I don't know about your children. My children were very difficult, right? One of them is actually sitting in the audience. So the daycare teachers who take care of these kids, how difficult their job is and how important their job is and how important that job is to the, to the outcomes of our children. And the daycare teachers, the same daycare teachers who are so important for our children, don't make enough to make ends meet. And we're wondering, as a society, like, oh, but it's unaffordable. Like, I would love for us to go back to our values and principles and say, is this reasonable? And how do we fix this? We need to figure out a way to fix this. So the second question.
It's the same with agricultural workers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so many people in agricultural industry, caregiving, retail, fulfillment centers. During the pandemic, we call these workers essential workers. We call them essential workers because they are so essential to the functioning of our economy. And you wouldn't tell that by looking at their wages or how they're treated. The second one was about profit sharing.
Profit sharing, yes.
So there's one of the 4 companies that I studied originally, Quick Trip, which is partly employee owned, as you were talking about, and they do profit sharing with their employees, and that's fantastic, right? That's fantastic. But if the base level of pay is not high enough, you're going to lose people. And when I say high enough, it's high enough to be able to live and take care of your family and have agency in your life.
Okay. Yep. In the back.
Hi. Big fan of your work. Been
Thank
following
you.
you for a long time.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here. So my question is, you'd mentioned the importance of policies that incentivize businesses to adopt higher road approaches, the good job strategies. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts about what that would look like in practice?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. One thing that comes to mind immediately is tax incentives, right? When a company invests in technology, we provide all sorts of tax incentives for investing in technology. We don't do that with investing in workers. So that might be one, approach that you can nudge companies toward people investment.
So despite the pandemic and the impact it had on the labor market, it seems to me we're still hearing, what I consider a lot of whining by businesses about labor shortage. And it would seem to me, especially in this environment, that a firm that would adopt a good job strategy would have their picking. I mean, it could be a competitive advantage. So I was wondering in your business school environment if people aren't seeing things that way as a competitive edge to be the best employer around,
Yes.
as opposed to making it just a moral case.
Yes, I will say for sure it is a competitive case, competitive advantage for them. But I will say it with a nuance, with some practical, real world type of answer, which is, look at retail workers, restaurant workers, those who have had to work during the pandemic, those who risk their health, their lives, to be able to give us the goods that we buy and take care of ourselves. They worked under those circumstances. They went through this whole masking thing. Are you masking? Are you not masking? Customers yelled at them because they weren't enforcing masking. Customers yelled at them because they were enforcing masking. They went through a really tough period everywhere in retail, no matter what company you're thinking about. And then inflation hit. Right now, those same workers are blamed for higher prices. So I don't want to say a rosy picture of, things that, these good jobs companies like Costco, Quick Trip, they're so wonderful. We've all went through a very difficult period, and they too went through a very difficult period. Now, is it easier for them? Most probably.
Okay, we'll take one more question here, and then I'll ask you one to wrap up.
I just wanted to ask, are you seeing the emergence of like communities of practice among employers, or like groups of employers that are actually sort of committed to this in a sincere way, that are leaning on one another to be able to figure out some of the challenges to making better jobs?
One of the things that Sarah has been working on is Worker Financial Wellness Initiative. And PayPal and Just Capital have been the leaders in that initiative, and our Good Jobs Institute with Sarah's leadership has been part of that. And this has been a bunch of businesses working together to create awareness about pay and looking at their workers to see what percentage of our workers are making a living wage, and how do we learn from each other in terms of how to both create awareness and solve the problem. So that's probably one of our good examples of companies working together as a group to solve big problems.
Great. So one of the things I loved in your book is the observations you share of like you and Sarah and like the team you work with going around and shopping and observing things. And some of them are quite funny, so I recommend the book. It's actually good for a laugh in some places.
I've never had this response from them.
Well, Yankee skier in New England, I found hilarious. But anyway, but we do have a terrific audience here online. They care about good jobs, and they're also consumers, right? So what would you advise them to sort of pay attention to look for, to think about as they're shopping if they want to be supporting good jobs?
Yeah, I guess there's that easy answer, which is shop with your values, right? Where you shop reflect your values. So shop from companies that provide good jobs. But that's a lot of work for consumers, because they need to figure out which companies are providing good jobs. I think the real thing that we can all do, and I don't want to advise you. I mean, you probably have advice for me, but I'll share with you what I try to remind myself and the advice that I give myself about this, which is, if I called because there's a problem with my ticket and the rep on the phone can't help me, right? Or if I'm at the supermarket and the line is too long, or when I'm waiting, the person won't substitute an item. It's just a simple thing I ask as a customer, can I substitute this with that? And they won't do it. And to think, I remind myself, it's not their fault. It's the system that's designed for them to fail in front of me. So have more empathy and treat other people with kindness, because it makes a difference for frontline workers. I remember asking Todd, who works at Costco, like, what would you want your customers to do? And he said, look at us in the eye, and once in a while be thankful. So those are the things that I try to remind myself when I'm interacting with frontline workers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you all for being here. I want to also thank my colleagues. They do an amazing job. Matt Helmer, who is running around back there, but does so much more than run around with a microphone, let me tell you. Merritt Stevens, Suning Young, Colleen Cunningham, many thanks to our Aspen Institute AV colleagues who keep our technology working. Really thank you all for joining and sharing your questions and being here today. And we do love your feedback, so you can send us an email. Again, it's eop.program@aspeninstitute.org, or fill out the survey if you're online. Next up from us, we're going to have a special 2-day employee ownership ideas forum, June 14th and 15th. So if you're interested in employee ownership, please keep an eye out for information on that, and hopefully you can join us. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Oh yeah, Matt, are you doing a raffle?
Just a quick announcement. We're giving away 3 books. So the winners were Carrie Ann Malloy, Kathleen Vickland, and Marina Matatora.
I'm so happy. Was our babysitter for 3 years. Now she did a great job here. She moved to Washington, and I'm so glad I didn't do it. Oh, fantastic! I miss it every day.
So if I called your name, you can meet us up front, and we'll give you your book.
All right.
Book sales are available too, and I think Zainab might have some time to sign as well.
You'll sign, right?